African Americans in this country are the only groups. They have no culture. It depends on who you meet, where you meet them.
But currently, there's not an African American culture.
No.
Yes, there is.
What is it?
Uh,
Name 2 value systems in the African American culture.
value
Name,
system.
yes. Name 2 taboos in the African American culture system.
All right, so it seems like he might be interviewing the wrong person because she doesn't know the answer. So let's just say this: 2 value systems in the African American culture, or we might say Black American culture. I'm gonna tell you number 1 is being polite in public. You guys notice, especially us from the South, we say yes sir, yes ma'am, may I, please. We open the door for women. All those type of things are 2 value systems that most of us grew up with. And the second thing is also gonna be respecting your elders. Now, I will give him this. In Black American culture today, we are starting to lose our value systems. Correct. Now, if you're judging 2025 Black American culture with Gen Z, yes, that makes a lot of sense. But historically, I mean, you got to remember we were slaves at one point, right? So we had to have respect. So we had values. We had to. Otherwise, we got our ass whipped to death. So that's not going to work. You want to know 2 taboos in the Black American culture? Be gay and date a white girl. Okay, those are 2 things. Now in Africa, that's dating a white girl can be a flex. Okay, and I know I say Africans don't white worship, but it is very true that Africans, generally speaking, maybe not in South Africa, but Africans and even Black Brazilians, I noticed when I was there, generally speaking, view dating a white person as they've made it. So those are 2 things that we definitely have in different. But let's go ahead and continue, and then we're going to get into a reason why Trump has some points when it comes to immigration.
System. Name 2 traditions, by the way, in the African American culture system. There is no value for freedom if you don't understand what it is. The
Black Americans fought for freedom, but let's keep going.
concept of free, you have to have a foundation on which it would balance when you ask for it. Civil rights, they give it to you. You have no culture.
Whatever
Nancy,
the fuck that
you've
means.
been here, born here. Why would you be surprised if I say African Americans don't have a culture? What, twerking?
Again, so what the fuck is this dude talking about? So of course he brings up twerking. And now, as I said before, in 2025, so America, and I've done videos about this, America is a degenerate society, meaning that not just Black American culture, all cultures across the USA are degenerated, except for those immigrants that are coming because they have their culture in their country, which is not so degenerate. I mean, it will over time as it moves to the United States. But like, if you are a white American, y'all's culture, a lot of white Americans are not happy with the culture today that they have, as opposed to ones they had 50 years ago. Black Americans had more self-respect 100 years ago. You could tell by the way how they dressed. They wore suits and they actually carried themselves with respect, as opposed to nowadays they got their ass out. You know, their underwear is showing. It looks absolutely ridiculous. So yes, America is a degenerate society. So today we don't have a culture. I would agree with that. Today we don't have a culture, or we do, but it's degenerating. But historically, he's trying to make it seem like we've never been shit, like we've never had a culture. Let's continue.
So anything
But I feel like African American culture has definitely
you say that,
mainstream.
no, you say the word, the African American culture. What is it? Okay,
Like
fine.
like hip hop.
Oh,
I mean,
Not
when
hip
you
hop.
ask somebody that type of question, what is Kenyan culture? What do you mean, what is Kenyan culture? Like, you got to narrow that down. That's like saying, what is, I don't even know, but he's asking a very broad question. He needs to ask, what about that specific culture? Let's just get into the rest of this video. This shit is ignorant.
I mean, I don't want to.
Look,
Yes, I feel like
you haven't thought about it. It's fine. Don't make things up.
I'm not making it up.
Okay,
I feel like
then educate me. You feel, you should know. You were born and raised here.
yes, but I have a
Are you African American?
I'm Haitian American.
That's correct.
So that goes back to the entire thing. He's asking the wrong fucking person these questions. Haitian, that's like if a Kenyan moves to America and you want to ask them what is Black American culture, why the hell would you be asking them that? Even if they're second generation, why would you be asking them that? Now, listen, she has something that she can immediately go back to and base her culture off of, which is Haiti. Okay? we black Americans, that's why they call us niggas, because we're literally different. You had slaves that were brought from the Congo, from Angola, that ended up in South Carolina. You had some that came from Nigeria, Ghana, from Senegal, that ended up in Louisiana, and then this slave was sold to this state, and they end up mixing. We don't know where the hell we came from, so we had to generate our own culture. So first,
You don't know where the hell you come from. But Shalom, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakha Kodash. I want to give double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, because those are the men who I learned this truth from through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Yahweh is the true name of the God of Israel. Yahweh Shai is what the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, but his one and only true name is Yahweh Shai. And it's truly a privilege to have the gift of faith through the blood and sacrifice of Yahweh Shai. All right, because being in this truth, you get to discern, who the men of the Lord are, who the elect is, and you could just really see like our people, the so-called Negroes, Hispanics, and Native American Indians, which are the real 12 tribes of Israel. We are the biblical descendants of Jacob. All right. We're the children of the promise. We're the seed of the promise. The so-called Negroes, Hispanics, and Native American Indians. Our seed line makes up the 12 tribes of Israel. And we're the Heavenly Father's chosen people on the planet Earth. All right. And our people, which is all prophetic, because when you read Romans 11:7, it tells you that the elect of the nation of Israel would obtain this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, going back to what? Ephesians, the first chapter, concerning predestination. So when you read Zechariah 13:8, it says that 2/3 of the nation of Israel is going to get put to death here in America. Why? Because they're not a part of the elect, and ultimately they worship the so-called white man system. All right, his man-made religions, his westernization, his democracy, and they worship the so-called white man as a god. And in order for you to be successful in this world, you have to forsake Yahweh, the God of Israel, which is our God, and our God. He gave us a culture. He gave us a heritage. All right. Our heritage is what? The laws, statutes, and commandments, which consists of what? Our ancient manners and customs. Now, we can't keep that, all right, because we're not sovereign and independent. We're gonna get our culture and everything back, meaning it's gonna eventually become our lifestyle for our nation when Yahweh Shai makes us sovereign and independent when he returns back to establish us in our land, which is the promised land of Israel. All right. So the reason why our people are in the condition that they're in, and the reason why you had all these slave trades, not just the transatlantic slave trade, but the Indian Ocean slave trade, Dutch, British, Iberian slave trade. All right. You have multiple different slave trades. The reason why the Most High allowed this to happen is because we sinned before the Lord. When you read the Bible, you're reading a record of the Israelites. The Bible is the only book that explains why the so-called Negroes, Hispanics, and Native American Indians, why we're so lost and forsaken as a people and downtrodden. All right. There's no other book. There's no school, college. There's no there's nothing on the planet Earth, all right, outside the Bible that could tell our people, the truth. And that's what our people don't realize. So when you watch these particular videos where they demonize passport bros, or they just demonize so-called black men, it seems like so-called black men, they can't get a damn break. All right. No matter where they at, whether they in America, outside of America. Why is that? Because that goes back to what? The curses of Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, which explains what? Our living conditions on the planet Earth, whether we're in America, outside of America, these curses follow us wherever we are. Because it says what? In Deuteronomy 28:46, that these curses should be upon thy seed forever, meaning until Yahushua returns back. Once Yahushua returns back, then the curses is going to be completely taken off us, because the curses of Deuteronomy chapter 28, as well as Leviticus 26, all right, that's put on our people until Yahushua returns back. So that's what you need to understand. The curses is a consequence for what we did. All right, sinning before the Lord, breaking the law, statutes, and commandments. That's why our people are lost. So when you see stuff like this, like with the situation right now going on in Kenya, all right, you got them Hamites over there that don't want Israelites, so-called black men in their country, because they know that they're different. All right, the true indigenous Africans, which is not our people, by the way, they're another dark nation. But just because they're a dark nation, that doesn't make them the same seed line as us, because the Most High is dealing with a particular seed on the planet Earth. And we know the seed, it goes back to what? Sperm. All right. A man's sperm is his seed. Nations are established through the seed of a man. When you read in the Bible, a nation's name comes from who? A man. All right. So men are the progenitors of life. So after the flood, you read about the story of Noah and his three children. Everybody on the planet Earth comes from one of them three sons, because women, they don't carry seed. So a woman, she can't be the progenitor of life because she doesn't carry seed. All right. So the Hamites, which are the indigenous Africans, they come from the seed of Ham. All right. And the Israelites, being the seed of the promise, they come from the actual man that's named Israel. All right. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. So that's where our name comes from. That's why we call ourselves Hebrew Israelites, because you have different stock of Hebrews. You know, you got different Shemites, but not all Shemites is the same, because you got, for an example, let me show you, right? You got Hebrew Edomites, you got Hebrew Elamites, you got Hebrew Assyrians, Hebrew Syrians, Hebrew Ishmaelites, Hebrew Moabites, Hebrew Ammonites, all right? And we're Hebrew Israelites, the chosen nation on the planet Earth, period. So that's where our name comes from. So yes, we do got a culture, but what happened to our people is prophetic. But when you read Ezekiel, the 37th chapter, it talks about what? The dry bones waking up out of that dead state, that exceeding great army, which is ultimately a spiritual army, which represent who? The elect of the nation of Israel. All of our people is not going to be able to accept this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, because the whole nation of Israel is not a part of the elect of the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel is the chosen nation, but within the chosen nation, you have particular spirits or particular individuals that the Most High predestinated before the earth was even created to receive this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding through Yahushua blood and sacrifice. All right. So now I just want to get into some scriptures, and then I'm gonna let some more of this video play, because Austin Harleman, like I said, he's not in the truth. He really doesn't know anything, and he's admitting that he doesn't know anything. All right, he keeps saying he don't know where he come from. Well, you're an Israelite, all right, more than likely from the tribe of Judah, because all the other tribes, when you look at them, they got like their flag and stuff like that, but those particular islands or countries that they're in, they don't control that. All right. It's the heathen, ultimately the Edomites, that control all these countries through their centralized banking system. So although you may go to a Colombia, although you may go to a Jamaica, although you may go to a Haiti, our people don't control the resources and financial system where they've been scattered at, because that's the key thing. You've been scattered there. All right. You didn't always just exist in the Caribbean islands. You didn't always just exist in Central and South and North America, as well as Canada. You didn't always exist in these places. You migrated there, you sojourned there, all right, through biblical prophecy. Ultimately, our true homeland is the promised land of Israel. that we're going to get back when Yahweh Shai makes us sovereign and independent and brings us back to our land. So now we're about to read in the Bible how our people lost their identity. So this is Jeremiah chapter 17 and verse 4. It says, and thou even thyself. So this is the Lord telling Jeremiah that the nation of Israel, including himself, shall discontinue from thy heritage, right? So back during this time, the Israelites was in the Babylonian captivity, all right? You had the southern kingdom, they went into captivity under the Babylonians, and then you had the northern kingdom of Israel, right? The lost 10 tribes, they went into captivity under the Assyrians, all right? So they knew who they were during that time. They knew their identity back during that time. So this would be what? A future prophecy that will happen in the future. All right. So Jeremiah 17:4, and thou even thyself shall discontinue from thy heritage. We have a heritage. All right. What's our heritage? The laws, statutes, and commandments that was only given unto the children of Israel in the wilderness. That's our heritage. That's our culture. All right. Black culture, that's not a culture. That's a deaf culture. That's something that the so-called white man, the biblical Edomites, came up with to control and destroy our people and to separate us from our God ultimately. All right. It says, shall discontinue from thy heritage that I gave thee. So when you read about the Israelites in the wilderness, what did the Most High give them? He gave them laws, statutes, and commandments, which is the perfect guideline on how to live on the planet Earth, how we will govern ourselves as a nation of people. That's our heritage. That's our culture. All right. The reason why you don't see our people walking around, identifying as Israelites, because first of all, it's only meant for what? The elect of the nation of Israel to obtain the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, knowing their identity. Because even if you know you're an Israelite, that doesn't mean that you have the Holy Spirit, and that doesn't mean that you are part of the elect. That doesn't mean that you calling upon the correct name for the God of Israel, which is and only is Yahweh, as well as worshiping his only begotten son as he commanded, whose name is Yahweh Shai. All right. So we have a heritage, but majority of our people, they don't know that. They want to identify as other nationalities. They want to identify as different man-made religions, and they forgot their own traditions. They forgot their power. All right. So it says that I gave thee. It says, and I will cause thee to serve thy enemies. All right. Who was our enemies? The 17 heathen nations. Because, like I said, after the flood, there was 18 nations that was established. The seed of the promise, which is the chosen nation, is who? The nation of Israel, being you so-called Negroes, Hispanics, and Native American Indians. Our seed line makes up the 12 tribes of Israel. Seed comes from a man. The seed is the sperm. So an Israelite man could put his seed within any woman on the planet Earth, and genetically, it wouldn't matter how the child comes out looking. It's all about what? The seed of the father. Because the promises, it went from who? Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. All right. So the promises only belong to who? The seed of the promise, which is the children of Israel. It doesn't belong to the heathen nations. All right. Like the inheritance of the promised land of Israel. That only belongs to the Israelites. It don't belong to the heathen nations. All right. Continuing on. It says that I gave thee and I will cause thee to serve thy enemies. So the only chosen nation is the nation of Israel. And then after that, you have 17 heathen nations. All right. It says, yep, to serve thy enemies in the land, singular. Now, what land is that referring to? It's referring to the land of America. All right. Babylon the Great. Because this is the place where we lost our identity before the Great Awakening, of 1969 through 1971. All right. Before then, our people, they lost their true heritage. They lost their identity, especially after the second temple was destroyed. All right. Continuing on, it says, which thou knowest not. America is a land that we know is not, because America, it used to also be known as the land of Canaan. And we know that the word Canaan It means unknown. All right. Because America or Asherith, as the scriptures say, they go about different names, but in the end times, it's identified as what? Babylon the Great, right? So this is the place where we discontinue from our heritage. You know, during slavery, we wasn't allowed to read the Bible and stuff like that, right? It says, which thou knowest not. So this is the land that we ain't know about because everybody eventually migrated over here, right? Everybody comes from the east and then migrated to the west. You know, once upon a time, there wasn't people living in America until the lost 10 tribes that you read about in Second Ezra chapter 13 from verses 40 through 46, right? That's how the so-called Native American tribes, that's how they came over here, all right? So-called Native American Indians, the Indians of South, Central, and North America. That's the lost 10 tribes of Israel. And some of them inhabited the Caribbean islands like Puerto Rico, all right, Dominican Republic. So the Bible, it explains everything, how our people got to this side of the world, all right, why they so lost as a people. The scriptures call our people lost sheep because they lost. They don't know where the hell they come from. But the prophets, through the Holy Spirit, through Yahweh's blood and sacrifice, you know, we trying to pipe unto you, meaning we trying to tell you to hearken. We're trying to tell our people to repent. The reason why you're in this condition is because you sinned before the God of Israel. And the only way to be made right with the God of Israel and gain forgiveness and be under grace is by worshiping and having faith upon Yahweh, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ. All right. It says, which thou knowest not, for ye have kindled a fire in my anger, which shall burn forever. Yes, it's going to burn until what? Until Yahweh comes back to deliver us. When you read about salvation, first of all, what is salvation? Salvation means being delivered from destruction or being delivered from ruin. Now, everybody's familiar with the story of the lake of fire. All right. The lake of fire is talking about Babylon the Great, which is America being destroyed by thermonuclear destruction. All right. Now, the elect, known as the one third here in Babylon the Great, how are we going to escape that destruction? Right here, by Yahweh, by the chariots of Israel. All right. The so called UFOs, the so called UAPs. All right. These vehicles is how we're going to escape the destruction of Babylon the Great. All right. Because you have Christians, they say, oh, I'm saved. I'm saved. You're not saved from nothing. All right. You're not saved from nothing. The only way to escape this nuclear destruction that's going to happen during World War III is you have to be a part of the elect. All right. Only the Father knows who's a part of the elect, but there's particular end time prophecies on characteristics that the elect will have. Like one of the things is they would be made wise unto salvation, meaning there's a specific gospel that the elect have to teach and will be taught so that they could be made wise unto salvation. All right. And the Hebrew Israelite camp, you Israelites need to be following is only Great Millstone because you need to understand not every Hebrew Israelite camp is the same. You have different camps. You got sting operation camps. You got Masonic camps. That's in these secret societies. They doing the agendas of the so-called white man. You know, they may know or teach you that you Israel, but they may get the name of the Lord wrong. They may tell you not to worship his only begotten son. All right. You got camps that's under the 501c3 charter. You know, you have hirelings, you got agents, you have wolves in sheep's clothing. So here at Great Millstone, what you're going to realize is we do a lot of rebuke and correction and exposing videos through the Holy Spirit. All right. Because when you read Ezekiel, the third chapter, it says what? That, you know, if we don't do these things, you know, we don't tell the truth to our people, then the blood would be on our hands. All right. Meaning we would be guilty because we know better. Right. So this truth is not about being liked or being accepted. It's about teaching the truth unto the very end, even if it involves persecution and death. So you need to understand as Israelite men or just Israelites in general coming into the truth, you need to be fully persuaded in your own mind. You have to be fully assured of the things you learn, because you don't know what type of trials or tribulations the Most High is going to put you in, to where you may have to teach by yourself, but you still got to defend the gospel. All right, you still got to teach what was taught unto you by the apostles of Great Millstone. All right, so understand that not every Hebrew Israelite camp is the same. The only camp you should be watching is Great Millstone. You got any questions? All right, go through our older videos, read the title, see if it links up with whatever questions you have, and watch the video and constantly take notes and constantly, immerse yourself in His Word. Learn while you still can, because the internet is not going to be around forever. Pursuant to Amos chapter 8, verses 11 and 12, that's end time prophecy. All right, the internet is not always going to be around. You're not always going to be able to go to a Great Millstone, camp, meaning a street ministry, and inquire and learn, how to get back in good graces with our God, the God of Israel, Yahweh, through His only begotten Son, Yahweh. So this is the time where you're supposed to be seeking the Lord. All right. So yeah, so that's it with that. All right. So when it says, "For ye have kindled a fire in my anger, which shall burn forever," that don't mean that we're gonna be under the curses of Deuteronomy chapter 28 forever. Because the scriptures from the Old to the New Testament, they talk about what? A new covenant. It talks about taking away the stony heart, which is rebellion, sin out of our spirits, right? So that's through Yahushua blood sacrifice, beginning with the elect of the nation of Israel that have the privilege of stepping into that new covenant first. When you read 1 Corinthians, the 15th chapter, it talks about how we're going to get them new bodies. When we get them new immortal bodies, then we're going to be able to keep the law, statutes, and commandments perfectly. All right. So that privilege of the first dominion, the first resurrection, being the chief rulers in the kingdom of heaven, that belongs to the elect of the nation of Israel, but more importantly, the 144,000, which is 12,000 prophets from each of the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. All right. So there you go. So until we change, until Yahweh comes back to deliver us and makes us sovereign and independent as a people, these curses will be upon our people forever. All right. But it don't literally mean forever. So that's it with that. Now let's go here. Because the reason why our people is lost is because they don't know the truth. Or if they know the or if they came across the truth, they're not taking heed to the truth. All right. There's only one truth. This is Second Thessalonians chapter 2. And I'm gonna start at, let's see, Second Thessalonians 2 and 3. It says, "Let no man deceive you by any means." Now, even if a guy knows that he's an Israelite, he could still be a deceiver. He could still be a false prophet. This is why you're not supposed to watch a bunch of Hebrew Israelite camps thinking that we all teach the same thing. We don't all teach the same thing. All right. The camp that you should be following is Great Millstone through the Holy Spirit. So you got to be careful. There's a lot of false prophets. There's a lot of hirelings. All right. There's guys that they know that they're Israelites, but they still teach Christianity doctrines. They teach their own private interpretations of the scriptures. It says, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first." So the falling away first, that deals with what? Our people become a lost sheep, forgetting their heritage, forgetting their culture, forgetting their identity, forgetting the name of their God, forgetting the name of Yahweh. All right? Because the Lord's name is not Jesus. 2,000 plus years ago, they wasn't calling him Jesus. They was calling him Yahweh. All right? Continuing on. So this is what happened to our people. They became lost sheep. All right? But the only ones that's going to obtain this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, like it says in Romans 11:7, is who? The elect of the nation of Israel. All right? So continuing on. So this great falling away first, this happened during 70 AD, all right, under the Flavian dynasty, which is Vespasian and his two sons, Titus and Domitian. They led an end to the Israelite estate, all right. And under Titus, Titus had over 60,000 Roman soldiers besiege and completely surround Jerusalem to the point where our people, they couldn't leave the land of Jerusalem. They couldn't leave the land of Israel. All right. So through the graces of the Most High to fulfill prophecy, we had over 1 million Jews, as I'm going to bring out the secular history in this video. And I'm going to prove that, you know, that the Africans, they're not our people and that they sold us into slavery. All right. They sold us to the Ishmaelites, which is the so-called Arabs, and they sold us to those Amalekites, which is the top tribe from the nation of Edom, which is these Zionist Jews today. All right. That call themselves Jews, but they're not. I'm gonna bring out the history because you know you got particular individuals. They'll say, "Oh yeah, you know, the Hamites sold us, you know, to the Arabs and sold us to the so-called white man," which is true. But majority of the people I come across, they could never like bring out the concrete evidence. So in this video, I'm gonna show you the actual tribe that sold us. All right, because you got to know these things. That's why people they look stupid, they look ignorant, calling yourself African American, wanting to identify as a damn African. All right, we ain't no fucking Africans. We got our own culture, and the Africans they got their culture. We're the chosen people. They're not. Them Hamites, they're heathen. All right. Now you do have the seed line of Israel that's scattered amongst the Africans as well as all lands, but there's a difference between being scattered there and being the actual people. Second Thessalonians 2 and 3. It says, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come," right? Meaning the kingdom of heaven. Yahweh shall return it back. There's particular prophecies, like it says in Matthew 5 and 17, how it mentions one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, meaning what? That there's particular end time prophecies and prophecies that have to come to pass in the form of current events. All right. Before Yahweh Shai physically comes back by the way of the so-called UFOs. Because when Yahweh Shai returns back, they're going to call it an alien invasion because he's coming back as an angelic power, right? So you're going to have all these nations try to fight against Yahweh Shai. That's why the scriptures talk about what? The war in heaven. What's the war in heaven? The war in heaven is all these heathen nations under the authority and command of the Edomites, the last heathen nation to rule before the kingdom of heaven is established, pursuant to 2nd Ezra 6 and 9, right? That's how we know we're in the time of the end. Because when you read about these end time prophecies, these prophecies will be happening while the Edomites are in rulership, all right? So under the command of these Edomites, all nations eventually they're going to put their differences aside and they're going to team up, like how Ronald Reagan said years ago, and they're going to fight against Yahweh Shai and the angels, and they're going to lose. All right. When it says that the dragon and his angels fought, all right, the dragon is always synonymous with what? The ancient Roman Empire. Now, if you're familiar or you understand biblical prophecy, ancient Rome was destroyed. But when you read in Revelation, the 13th chapter, what does it say? It said that the deadly wound will be healed, meaning that the Romans, which is Edomites, because that's one of their powers, they had Greece, they had Rome, and now they got America and the EU, which is the deadly wound being healed. All right, because the Romans, they came back into rulership. All right, you even have the Treaty of Rome. So you need to realize that all these countries is governed and controlled by the central bankers. What nationality, according to the Bible, are the central bankers? They're Edomites, all right, the so-called white man in the sea line. Now, every particular nation, they got a top tribe within that particular nation. Like, for an example, the top tribe of the nation of Israel is the tribe of Judah. That's the same tribe that Yahushua, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, comes from. All right. Out of the line of Judah, that's where the kings come out of. Right. Like you got King David, King Solomon, you know, King Jehoshaphat. You got the kings that come out of that line, right? So out of the nation of Edom, the top tribe is the Amalekites. These are the true Amalekites, not the Palestinians. The Palestinians are Ishmaelites. All right. So these people, they control the World Bank. They control the IMF. They control all nations' money supply through their centralized banking system. So these people are in rulership. It's very clear that these people are in rulership to fulfill what? End time prophecy. All right. So these people is currently ruling right now. So now let's go back. So they're ruling, all right, in the revived Roman Empire in the form of America and the EU. So I'm gonna read it again. Second Thessalonians 2 and verse 3. It says, let no man deceive you by any means. It says, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first. So it's prophecy that before Yahushua returns back, our people, they will lose their heritage, they will lose their true identity, they will lose their culture. All right. And now, pursuant to Ezekiel the 37th chapter, which is end time prophecy, now our people, they're starting to remember themselves once again. All right. Beginning with the elect of the nation of Israel. And then ultimately all Israel under that new covenant. All right. So now I can keep it going now. So now you understand the secular history. Our people, they started to forget about themselves after 70 AD, all right, after the siege of Jerusalem. And that's when they fled into Africa. It says, except they come a falling away first, and that man of sin, who's the man of sin? The Edomites, all right, the so-called white man in Elam. They're the man of sin, all right. It says, be revealed the son of perdition, which the word perdition, it means destruction, all right. So they're the sons of destruction. So now let's keep it going. It's still recording. So there you go. So it was prophesied that what? We will become lost sheep. Continuing on. And even back during the time of the ancient Roman Empire, our people were lost. That's why you have the Israelite foreigners. That's why you got Acts the second chapter. That's why it says that what? That Yahweh that he's only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, because our people, they were lost after being conquered by all the heathen nations, constantly being besieged, having the first temple destroyed, having the second temple destroyed, right? So when these things started to happen a lot during history, all right, our people, they started forgetting themselves. Then you had our children, that's born in slavery, that's born in captivity, and they wouldn't remember themselves because it's a new generation. They would be brought up according to modern living or whatever nation is a rulership. They would be raised to adapt to that way of life, and they will forget themselves, right? So now let's read about our culture, because that's the problem with our people. They really ignorant, and they really think like they know something, and you don't know nothing. Just because you got a high IQ, that don't mean nothing to God. That don't mean nothing to the Most High. That's not in the scriptures. You got to have a high IQ. That don't mean shit. That just means you real stupid, and that means that you accept lies, right? Because you got a high IQ according to what? The so-called white man school system, the Board of Ed. And do your research on the Board of Ed, why it was even established in the first place, to prepare people for the workforce. So you got to know the history. So I'm going to read this real quick. This is Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 5. Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as the Lord. Now, when you see the word Lord in cats, that's referring to the God of Israel, which his name is Yahweh. All right. It says, Yahweh my God commanded me. So this is Moses speaking to the children of Israel. All right. So everything Moses is saying, he's telling the children of Israel to hearken unto him, because that's the instructions he got from the Most High. It says, commanded me that you should do so in the land, right? What's the land? The promised land of Israel that was given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? It says, will ye go to possess it? So when we get our land, which is our inheritance, right? Our blessing from our forefathers, there's a certain type of lifestyle and culture the Most High wants us to follow, which is the law, statutes, and commandments. It says, verse 6, keep therefore and do them. It says, for this is your wisdom, right? And your understanding in the sight of the nations. And what do you think that is? A culture, a heritage, right? So we do have a culture, but only the elect of the nation of Israel is going to come across that. Continuing on. But you can know you're an Israelite. You can know certain key things of the scriptures, but it's a certain type of gospel the Most High wants you to follow on the planet Earth through Yahushua, right? That the men of great millstones teach you. It says, and your understanding in the sight of the nations, meaning this is our culture, this is our heritage, right? It says, we shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. So they would observe our culture, our way of life, and be like, oh, wow, that makes sense. It makes sense not to eat lobster. It makes sense not to eat catfish, shrimp, crab, lobster, It makes sense not to eat certain things because those particular creatures, they help clean the ecosystem up. They clean the ocean up. They clean the rivers up, right? They eat all the bad bacteria. They clean the ocean. So now if you start eating these animals, now you're gonna get sick, but ultimately you're gonna disturb the ecosystem, right? So that's how habitats, that's how certain things they get destroyed over time and polluted. So that's how the nations are supposed to look at us. They're not supposed to be wanting to follow, black culture and hip hop. Black culture is a deaf culture. The word black, it means void of light, you know? Continuing on. So that's not our culture. Now, did we invent certain things? Of course, because it says Matthew 5 and 13. A lot of the inventions was created by who? So-called black men, Israelites. All right. We're the greatest people on earth. Everybody looks to us for fashion trends. Everybody wants to be like us, even when we're on the bottom. But in the kingdom, they're going to have to follow law, statutes, and commandments. Why? Because that's our culture that we're going to implement on the nations. Just like when they was in rulership, what does a nation do when they're in rulership? Whether it be like through the act of war or it's just their time to rule through the Most High will. They impose their culture on people. So if you don't follow their culture, then what happens? It's penalties for that, right? So that's it with that. So now this is Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 15. Because enough is enough already. Our people, they have tried to follow every religion you could think of, you know, try to militarize themselves. I mean, they tried absolutely everything and it's failing. Why? Because that's not what the Most High wants you to do. So everything you put your hand to do, you're gonna end up failing. Why? Because it's set up for Yahushua to be the savior. All right, He's gonna avenge us. He's gonna give us the power to take down our enemies, not us. All we have to do is just be spiritual and wait upon the Messiah to come back. Yahushua, that's it. We don't need to take matters into our own hands. But that's how people problem. And then they thinking that they're gonna go overseas and these curses are not gonna follow you. It said that the curses is gonna follow you. So it's not just an American thing, it's a seed thing. 28 and 15, Deuteronomy 28 and 15. But it shall come to pass if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God. When you read Luke chapter 1, verse 70, it's talking about what? A prophet, right? Because the Lord, he speaks to his prophets. It goes on to say, what is a prophet? A messenger of the Most High. So if you don't listen to the messenger that the Most High have sent to the nation of Israel, then what's going to happen? You're going to get put to death. You're going to be judged, right? Continuing on, it says, voice of Yahweh thy God. So whenever you see the word Lord in caps, it's referring to the God of Israel, Yahweh, right? It says to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. All right, all these curses, the reality of being on the bottom, being looked at as just slaves, niggas, no people with no culture, degenerates, being black, being confused, being on the bottom, right? This is what happens when you break the law, statutes, and commandments. This is our reality, right? So now let's read some of these curses. This is Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 37. It says, yep, Deuteronomy 20 and 37. Well, matter of fact, I don't want to jump the gun. Oh, yeah, I got it. Deuteronomy 28 and 37. It says, And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb and a byword among all the nations, right? All the places we've been scattered at, whether the Lord shall lead thee. Now let's read this in the NLT version, right? Because you got to understand these curses, this is the reality. The scriptures got all the answers, all right? But see, they're not going to teach you this in the churches. Why? Because that's not what the so-called white man set up. Deuteronomy 28:37 NLT. It says, you will become an object of horror. Damn. It says ridicule and mockery among the nations to which the Lord sends you. All right. So we will be on the bottom. So let's look at some of these bywords. Let's look at some of these mockeries, right? So I went on Google Images and I typed in bywords of Israelites, right? Let's look at some of these. Yep. Byword. Don't worry about who it's made by. I'm just focusing on, the bywords here for edification. It says byword, a nation called out of their name, right? Negroes. That's not a nationality. It says African Americans, blacks, colored, Haitians. It says Africans, Afro Colombians, Afro Cubans, Guyanese, Afro Mexicans, Bahamians, Black Caribs, Afro Guyanese, Hispanic, U.S. Virgin Islands, um, Cimarronese. It says Dominicans, Trinidadians, Afro Argentinians, Sambo, Afro Caribbeans, American Liberians, excuse me. Sound like a Robin, right? It says Creole, mulattoes. It says Jamaicans, Afro Brazilians, Afro Latinos. It says Puerto Ricans, Cape Verdans. It says Panamanians, Afro Surinese. It says Black Britons. It says Bar Bar Badians. It says Afro Canadians, Coon Moors, right? So this is some of them. There's some more. Let me go to the scriptures. This is Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 37. It says, and thou shalt become, meaning this is what was going to happen in the future. If we didn't hearken unto Moses, if we didn't hearken unto the Most High, right? Because the Most High set Moses and ultimately Aaron up, to be the messengers from Yahweh, all right? So if we didn't listen, then we will go through these curses because we was told this we're at in the wilderness. All right. So everything that we going through now, being on the bottom, living through the reality of the curses for how we sinned against the Lord, we was warned in the wilderness before it actually took place. So that's why it says, and thou shalt become an astonishment, because the most already knew through predestination that we were going to captivity. All right. It says, became an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword. Yep, among all nations, whether the Lord shall lead thee. And that's exactly what happened to our people, right? And let's read this on Google. Let me let this train pass by. So I went to Google, right? And I typed in bywords of Israel. AI overview. It says bywords of Israel refers to negative terms like niggas, spick, wetback. Oh, you niggas don't got a culture, right? You always looking to identify with the heathen nations because you don't know who you are. So it says, and phrases used by other nations to mock. That's what they do. They mock us. Oh, you black, you're a nigger, right? It says ridicule or express scorn towards Israel. This ain't happening to the so-called Jewish people. All right. They own a centralized banking system. They control all nations' money supply through the centralized banking system. They are not suffering at all. And even the least wealthy Jew, as long as he says that he's Jewish, he's automatically going to be accepted. All right. Our people are going through the curses of Deuteronomy chapter 28, the so called Negroes, Hispanics, and Native American Indians. Our seed is cursed worldwide until Yahushua returns back. So it says, often in response to covenant unfaithfulness, that's why we're going through this, and God's judgment as seen in biblical passages like 1 Kings 9 and 7, Psalms 44 and 14, which is one of my favorite scriptures. You can start at 13. It says in Deuteronomy 28 and 37. In these contexts, byword signifies that Israel will become a proverbial example of a people suffering God's displeasure, a laughing stock, or object of scorn. among all people. So that's what happens to our people. It doesn't matter what country we are in, whether it be America, no matter where it's at in the world, we're always just going to be looked at as being on the bottom. All right. Especially a so called Negro. A so called Negro just has it the absolutely worst. All right. The so called Hispanics, which the word Hispanic, it just means a Spanish speaking territory. That's not a nationality. That's just a territory that's conquered by the Spaniards. That's not a nationality. So when you look at the so-called Hispanics and Latinos and the different Indian tribes, they go through the same curses that the so-called Negroes go through. All right. But because of how they look, they're not even accepted by the Southern Kingdom on a large scale. Right. But what does it say in Jeremiah 15:33? It says that Judah and Israel will be oppressed together and Babylon the Great. All right. Because we know when you read First Kings the 11th and the 12th chapter, when King Solomon got old, he sinned before the Lord by following the customs, traditions, and believing in on the philosophies of his concubine wives, which were his heathen wives. All right. So when he got up in age, his mind got weaker, his spirit got weaker, and he sinned before the Lord. So the Lord took the kingdom from King Solomon and he divided it in two: the southern kingdom, which is Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, and then the northern kingdom, known as the kingdom of Israel. All right, that's the lost 10 tribes of Israel. All right, and then we know that what? The Most High, he did away with Dan as a tribe. So there's no 13 tribes, there's 12 tribes. All right, so continuing on. So you got the northern and the southern kingdom. It says, yep, so that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. So I'll keep it going. So another byword is what? African American, because the word African, as I'm going to read right here, give you a little backstory. That comes from Leo's Scorpio Africanus, right? And then the word America, it comes from a Edomite, a so-called white man named Americo Vespucci. So if you understand that the Bible deals with seed lines, meaning that your nationality, your identity is based upon the seed of your father. That's the culture you're going to be born into based off of the seed of your father. So if your nationality, your identity is determined by the seed of your father, how can we be African and American? That's two different Edomites. All right. It wouldn't make sense. How come they got to constantly keep changing our nationality? They got to constantly keep changing our identity. That doesn't make sense. You can't say that we're African because we got a whole history before Africa. You can't say that the different Indian tribes is, American because they have a history before coming over here, as it says in Second Ezra 13 verses 40 through 46, and First Kings, or no, Second Kings the 17th chapter. All right, we have a whole history before the Americas, before Africa, before Christopher Columbus, before Louis D. Torres, before the Spanish conquistadors. All right, continuing on. So let's read about this word Africa, or Africanus, Leo Scopio Africanus, right? AI overview. It says the Roman general Scopio Africanus name does not give the continent its name. Rather, the name Africa is believed to have been derived from the word Afri, the name of a tribe that inhabited the region around the ancient city of Carthage. It says after defeating the Carthaginians, the Romans applied. And who are the Romans? The Romans were Edomites. Look at the architecture. All right. Look at the different statues of how majority of the Romans look, especially the Caesars. They look like Edomites, right? It says the Romans, which is Edomites, the so-called white man in sea line, the devil's serpent seed on the planet Earth. The Romans applied the name Africa to the region and later to the entire continent. And this goes back to our what? Psalms chapter 49, verse 11. How the Romans, the Greeks, which were Edomites, they changed people's biblical identity. They switched their names up, right? So the names that you see now that countries or nations is being called, that's not their biblical identities. All right. These are names that was changing over time. And the scriptures say what? You're not supposed to remove your neighbor's landmark. All right. So these Edomites, they don't follow the law, statutes, and commandments, and they're definitely not a light unto the Gentiles because they don't do nothing that the Most High says. They follow the Babylonian Talmud. All right, they worship Satan. They don't follow the law, statutes, and commandments. Why? Because they're created to be evil. The vessels of wrath fitted to destruction, as the scriptures say. So it says the Romans applied the name Africa to the region and later to the entire continent, with Scorpio Africanus being awarded the horrific title Africanus for his victories in their territory. And see, this is why you got to have the prophets prophesy unto you and teach you the truth. Because a lot of this information over time, it gets hidden. All right. And these are things that when I first came into the truth, like over 10 years ago, these are things when I heard it, it resonated with my spirit and it made sense. All right. You're not going to learn this type of stuff in these institutionalized organizations like the school system, the board of ed, college, right? Let's go down here. It says the origin of the name Africa. From the Roman perspective, the Romans referred to the land around Carthage as the Roman province of Africa. It says the title Africanus, Scorpio, after achieving victory in the Second Punic War, which was over Hannibal the Great, which was an Israelite in North Africa, right? Like Morocco, you have a lot of Israelites that's there, the seed of Jacob. It says was granted the horrific surname Africanus, meaning the African or the conqueror of Africa. All right. So there you go. So ultimately, that name Africa, it derives from a surname that was given unto the Roman general Leo Scorpio Africanus. All right. So the point is, whether it comes from him or it comes from the original inhabitants of the land, which is the Hamites, right, which is not the seed of Jacob, it's still two heathen nations, two different seed lines. So we're not Hamites and we're not Edomites, right? We have our own culture. You got a lot of our people, they want to try and identify, oh, we used to be, black kings and black queens, and you see them wear the Egyptian ankh or the Nefertiti, gold pendant. We're not Egyptians, all right? This is Exodus 11:7. But against any of the children of Israel shall not a dog move his tongue against man or beast, that ye may know how the Lord, right? The word Lord is in caps. So his name is Yahweh, right? When you see the word Lord in caps, it's referring to the God of Israel, Yahweh. It says, doeth put a difference, right? A difference in what? Culture, heritage, law, statutes, and commandments, worship, right? Morals between the Egyptians and Israel. Because it's two dark nations, it's two nations of color, but it's two different seed lines, two different spirits, two different ways of life. All right. Just because somebody's dark skinned, that doesn't mean that you're the same. Look at an East Indian, for example. A lot of East Indians, they're darker than me, and I'm dark skinned. Hence my name Kordar. It means dark skin. All right. But you look at a lot of East Indians, they're very dark. Some of them is darker than our people. You got some Arabs, they're dark. All right. Really, all nations are people of color except for the Edomites. Going back to what? The curse of Cain. That distinguishing mark that was put on him for how he murdered his brother Abel. All right. So we're different. This is Leviticus 18, and I'm gonna start at verse 1. It says, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto the children of Israel, saying to them, I am the Lord your God. Right? In other words, Moses, he's the spokesman or the messenger from the Most High. Whatever the Most High wants to tell the children of Israel, he's always going to have a prophet or a man that he set up from the seed of Jacob that we have to hearken to. Going back to Deuteronomy 18, right? So it says, after the doings of the land of Egypt, right? wherein ye dwelt shall ye not do. So we're not Egyptian. All right. Now, the main controversy with Egypt is the pyramids and all that. Look, all you got to do is just read in the scriptures how it says that we built treasure cities, right? So yeah, it was the Israelites that built the pyramids. That's why even when you look at Central and South America, what's the correlation between the so-called Hispanic and Latino tribes having pyramids in their lands? Because they was once oppressing ancient Egypt with their brothers, all right, the southern kingdom, Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, and together with the 12 tribes of Israel that was in hard bondage, meaning hard slavery underneath the ancient Egyptians, which are Hamites. All right. So that's why you see dumb pyramids like that. Ain't supposed to be something you worship. Because remember, with the Egyptians, they pretty much identified the pyramids were worshiping, things in the heavens, like the correlations and stuff of that nature. So it says Leviticus 18:3, after the doings of the land of Egypt, wherein ye dwelt, shall ye not do, and after the doings of the land of Canaan, which is two Hamites, two different tribes of Hamites, whether I bring you, which is the promised land of Israel, it says, shall ye not do. Neither shall ye walk in their ordinances, meaning their philosophies, their way of life, their culture, their heritage, their ways of worship, their philosophies. All right. We're not supposed to be like them. We're not Egyptian. We have a culture. So that's it with that. So now let's actually go into how our people was in Africa. Why were they in Africa? All right, because before Africa, where were they? They was in the Roman Empire, right? So this is from a famous book most Israelites, or really all camps, have used before, right? From Babylon to Timbuktu. I'm only going to use page 84 because it links up with the scriptures. So it says during the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews, right? 1 million Jews, meaning dark skinned Jews, Negroes, all right? It ain't talking about Zionist Jews that stole our identity and stole our heritage and our inheritance. It ain't talking about them. All right. In order for you to be the chosen nation, you got to come from the seed line of Jacob. You can't be a convert and think you're going to follow our customs and now you one of us spiritually. That's stupid. And that doesn't make sense. So it says it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled into Africa. This is how we got into Africa. But you're not going to learn this in school because they want us to identify as being African or being Egyptian. And we're not that. First of all, we greater than them. All right. It says fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution. And this is what Yahushua, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, this is what he prophesied. When you read Matthew, the 24th chapter, in the first two verses, he was talking about what? Under the Flavian dynasty, the second temple was going to be destroyed. All right. Rome was becoming in debt. So what do? They ransacked the temple. That's why when you look at the Ark of Titus, which commemorates their victory over Jerusalem, right, over us, what do you see? You see Edomites holding the menorah, all right? They did that because Rome was going bankrupt. So they pretty much got all that money back after they ransacked our temple. And these Edomites, they evil, man. Read first Ezra's the fourth chapter. They destroyed the first temple. All right. They destroyed the second temple under the Flavian dynasty, which consists of Vespasian and his two sons, Titus and Domitian. And we know the third temple is a spiritual temple. But even with that, representing the elect men of the nation of Israel, they want to try and persecute and destroy us by taking down our YouTube channels. All right, demonizing us. Ultimately, if we don't, for the elect that don't worship the image of the beast, his new world order, all right, and take his mark, they want to put us to death. So these Edomites, they against us following our God and following our way of life, which is the law, statutes, and commandments, and having faith upon Yahweh. So it says, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery, the slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. All right. We're not Jewish because we know ISH at the end of the word. It means trying or trying to mimic the original thing. No, we are the Jews. All right. Remember, Jew is just short for Judah. And I'm gonna prove to you that the so-called Negroes were Shemites, and that even when you look at an old map of Africa concerning the kingdom of Wida, right? That's a corrupt way of saying Judah. So these people, they know who we are, right? But then when we bring out the truth, oh, we a racist cult. But then the so-called white man, the Edomites, they can rape, rob, and murder us. They can steal our heritage. They can steal our identity, and nobody wants to say nothing about that. And then they'll say, "Oh, you being anti-Semitic." No, it was anti-Semitic what they did to our people, right? Let's read this real quick. But before I do that, I just want to read this, right? So this is from the Zondervan Bible Dictionary, 1963. It says Ham, perhaps hot, right? Because remember, Noah, he had three sons. Everybody in the planet Earth is a descendant from one of Noah's three sons. Now, out of the line of Shem, eventually came who? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? So Ham meaning hot, because when you look at those indigenous Africans over there, they're very dark, all right, because they constantly in the sun. They could barely grow beards, right? Anyways, it says the youngest son of Noah, and really the eldest son was Japheth. The youngest son was actually Sham or Shem, and then the second one it would be Ham, right? But anyways, let's keep it going. It says the youngest son of Noah, born probably about 96 years before the flood. It says, and one of eight persons to live through the flood, because it was Noah, his sons, and their wives, right? For the purpose of what? Repopulating the earth after the first death, which is destroying the earth during that time by the way of water, right? Because of the wickedness that was going on, the iniquity. It says he became the progenitor, meaning the first of the dark races, not the Negroes. Why the fuck is that? Because the Negroes, they come from the line of Shem. We're not African. All right. Every time an African get the chance, they always say, look, you so-called black people, we don't want you in our country. Y'all know people, y'all don't got no culture, y'all don't know what y'all identify as. Wait for this to go by. Y'all don't know what to identify as. They don't like us. All right. Even when you read in the scriptures, who was our main two enemies that we went to war with? It was the Amalekites, which is them Zionist Jews. All right. And then and the Philistines. We always was going to war, which the Philistines or Philistine, right? That was their descendants of the Egyptians, right? So it says he became the progenitor, meaning the first of the dark races, not the Negroes. So it's two nations with skin color, but it's two different seed lines. That's what you need to understand. All right. That's what separates people. Just because you have the same or similar skin color, that doesn't mean that you're the same nationality wise, culture wise, seed line wise, right? It says not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites, which is all Africans, right? And then it gives you the chapter, Genesis chapter 10, verses 6 through 20. All right. And then it talks about the curse of that came upon Canaan, and that was based upon what? Noah not turning his back like his two brothers did, Japheth and Shem. When Noah was drunk, he was naked in his room. All right. And Japheth and Shem turning their back, because you're not supposed to look upon your father's nakedness. That's against the law. Remember, back during that time, the law, it wasn't written on stone. It was taught as like oral tradition. It's just certain things you knew not to do, things that you're not supposed to do. So they turned their back and they put a sheet to cover their father's nakedness. But Ham, he looked upon his father's nakedness, which is a sin. So the curse eventually it went on who? Canaan. All right. That's why the scriptures say, "Curse be Canaan." So that's the curse of Ham. The curse of Ham is that he looked upon his father's nakedness, which is against the law. All right. And eventually that curse will play out in the form of the Israelites seizing or taking the promised land. All right. So it says, so that's it with that. Just that simple. Now let's go back down here. Right. So I'm gonna read this. Luke chapter 21, verses 20 through 24. This is Luke chapter 21 and verse 20. It says, and when ye shall see Jerusalem, Jerusalem is a people before it's a place, compassed with armies. What armies? The Roman armies under Titus. Titus had 60,000 Roman soldiers besieged Jerusalem to where we couldn't eat or drink, right? You had our people, they was resorting to cannibalism, right? It says, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, right? The wilderness of Zin, which would be what? The interiors of Africa. And that's why it says in the book From Babylon to Timbuktu, page 84, it was estimated that over 1 million black Jews fled into the interiors of Africa. They also went to Saudi Arabia. They also went to India. They also went to all over that region. They pretty much like spread out. That's why when you look at these other countries, like you go on YouTube for an example, right? And you type in black people in Yemen, black people in Saudi Arabia, black people in Africa, African tribes that go back to Hebrew Israelites in Africa. The reason why you're able to find this information and the reason why they're there is because it goes back to what I read in the scriptures. It was a prophecy that was meant to happen, but they don't teach us this in schools. Instead, they want to try and deceive you to make you think that you're an African because of your skin color, right? It says, and let them which are in the midst of it, meaning Jerusalem, depart out, so that they can flee the Roman persecution and go into the interiors of Africa. It says, and let not them that are in the countries enter into. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. Because it was the time of what? The Gentiles. All right, going back to Daniel, the second chapter. When you read Daniel, the second chapter, Nebuchadnezzar, which actually was an Assyrian, he had a dream. All right. And in the dream, it represented the statue, it represented the last heathen nations that was going to rule on the planet Earth before the kingdom of heaven is established, before the return of the Messiah. So the last heathen nation to rule, pursuant to Daniel the second chapter and second Ezra 6 and 9, Revelation the 13th chapter, would be who? The Edomites, in the form of the revived Roman Empire, in the form of America and the EU. So this is how we know we're in a time period when Yahushua, who the world ignorantly called Jesus Christ, is getting ready to return back to deliver the elect of the nation of Israel and to establish the kingdom of heaven on earth as prophesied. Right? So that's it with that. Because when you read down, it's going into what I'll read it. It says, but woe unto them that are with child and to them that give suck. Right? Because pretty much it was a famine in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land because of the Romans under Titus, and wrath upon this people. Going back to that hatred. Esau hate Jacob. Going back to Hebrews chapter 12, verses 16 to 17. Esau can't get his birthright back, right? He's been rejected of that. Ultimately, going back to what? Predestination, the will of the Father before the earth and spirits was even created. All right. So this is why so-called white people and so-called black people will never be able to get along, because it goes back to Jacob and Esau, which includes the so-called Hispanics and Native American Indians. Because what seed line do they come from? The seed of the promise from Jacob. All right. So that's why when you look at on the planet Earth, you look at what nation has had it the worst on the planet Earth. It's going to be the so-called Negroes first, and then the so-called Hispanics and Latino tribes second. All right. Look at the Trail of Tears, the Tuskegee experiment. You know how they used to grab the so-called Indian woman, the Native American Indians, the different Indian tribes of the Caribbean, Central, South America, North America, Canada. The pregnant woman, they used to hang them upside down and, you know, cut it's demonic, but that's their hate because they can't get the birthright back, right? Luke 21:24, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword. That's what happened to our people. It says, it shall be led away captive into all nations. That's the transatlantic slave trade. So it's a time skip. when you read the scriptures. All right. It goes into us being in our land in Jerusalem, fleeing Roman persecution, right? Fleeing into the interiors of Africa. And then from there, we will be sold to the four corners of the earth. We will be scattered as a people from all the different slave trades, the transatlantic slave trade, the Indian Ocean slave trade, British slave trade, Dutch slave trade, Iberian slave trade. All right. You will have all these different slave trades take place going back to what? Biblical prophecy. All these scriptures that I'm quoting and that I'm reading. Right. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, the 17 heathen nations, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Going back to what? Daniel, the second chapter. So this is the time of the Gentiles right now. Because after this, that's going to be it for the Gentiles. They're going to have to serve us forever because our kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. All right. Now let's read this. Now in Africa, right? See if I can find it real quick. Damn, I literally just had it open there. Let's see if I can find it. Okay. Give me a second. So pretty much when you look at an old map, right? It says 1947 British map showing Negro land. You have Western Negro land and Eastern Negro land, right? It says in the kingdom of Judah on the west coast of Africa. So the main bulk of slaves was taken from where? West Africa. That's where the kingdom of Judah was at. All right. Like the Mali dynasty, you look at Ghana, all in that region, right? The Igbo people, a lot. Bantu people, even the Bantu language comes from the original Paleo Hebrew. It's just watered down, right? So there you go. So if you was to actually look on this map, the people that went into slavery were Jews, all right? The kingdom of Judah, which consists of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, right? Now let's go back. Let me see what else I can find. Look at this. This map costs $1,400. You think our people gonna pay $1,400? This is how they're able to hide stuff from our people. That's why you gotta have teachers that feed you with wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, which are the men of great millstone, so you can really dig deep and find these things, right? So that's pretty much it. I had an AI overview, but I guess it disappeared. But you get the point, though. You get the point. So now let's read this because we always tell our people, the Hebrew Israelites, we always tell our people that it was another dark nation that's not the same as us that sold us to the Arabs, that sold us to the so-called white man. All right. The Africans, they sold Hebrew Israelites into slavery. It was easy for them to look at us based off of our customs, the way we speak, our spirit, and they would know, okay, even though this is another dark-skinned group of people, they're different than us. So it would be easy for them to round us up and to sell us. All right. Biblical prophecy, Joel 3:1. For behold, in those days and in that time, matter of fact, I just want to read this. Let's see. Okay, Joel 3, and just want to get to the point. Yeah, Joel 3:3. It says that they have cast lots for my people and have given a boy for an harlot. This is all history that took place. This literally took place during slavery, right? From like the 15 to 1600s on down, right? It says, and have given a boy for an harlot and sold a girl for wine that they might drink. It says, yeah, and what have ye to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon, and all the coast of Palestine? Will ye render me a recompense? And if ye recompense me swiftly and speedily, will I return your recompense upon your own head. So the Lord, the God of Israel, he's very aware that the Africans sold the Israelites into slavery. All right. That all nations benefited off of our people being sold into slavery. Let's read this in the NLT version. Joel 3:3. It says, They threw dice to decide which of my people would be their slaves. They traded boys to obtain prostitutes and sold girls for enough wine to get drunk. It says, what do you have against me, Tyre and Zidon, which are Africans, all right, Hamites? It says, in the cities of Palestine, are you trying to take revenge on me? Because how would you do that? By taking revenge on the Lord's people, right? If you are, then watch out. I will strike swiftly. I will pay you back for everything you have done. And when is the Lord going to do that? When Yahushua returns back. It says, you have taken my silver and gold and all my precious treasures and have carried them off to your pagan temples. It says, you have sold the people of Judah and Jerusalem to the Greeks. And who were the Greeks? They were Edomites. All right. So they could take them far from their homeland, which would be where? Here in America, and where we've been scattered through the four corners of the earth. All right. Hold Joel 3 and 6 in your mind. Let me prove to you that the Hamites sold Hebrew Israelites into slavery. All right. And there's another train coming. So this is the AI overview. If you want to know the actual Hamitic tribe that sold our people to the Arabs, to the so-called white man, all right, they're called the Dahomey tribe, right? Let me let this train pass by real quick. So I put AR overview, right? The Dahomey tribe sold slaves. AR overview, yes. The West African kingdom. Now remember, I literally just showed you a map. And the map showed what? Western Negro land. That's where the bulk of the slaves came from and was shipped from, right? Now, who sold them there? According to Joel, the third chapter, it says, yes, the West African kingdom of Dahomey was a major participant in the transatlantic slave trade from the 18th century until the mid 19th century. It says, as a powerful and highly militarized state, these were Hamites, and we used to always go to war with them. They used to go to war with the kingdom of Judah in Western Negro land. All right. It says it it used its army to capture people from neighboring tribes, right? Who were then sold to European traders in exchange for goods like firearms. So this is what Joel is prophesying about. Let's read it again, NLT. You can also read it in the KJV. Joel chapter 3, verse 6. It says, you have sold the people of Judah and Jerusalem to the Greeks. That's literally what it just said. It just told you who were then sold to European traders. Who the hell were the European traders? The Greeks, the Romans. They were Edomites, right? In exchange for goods like firearms. All right. Read again, Joel 3 and 6. It says, you have sold the people of Judah and Jerusalem to the Greeks so they could take them far from their homeland. Because then we will go into slavery. All right. Then they will go on to change our identity from Hebrews, which is a broken variation of saying Hebrews, then to Negroes, then colored, black, so forth and so on. All right. We fit the prophecies of being the Israelites, not them Zionist Jewish people. All right. So that's why the Lord is pissed. In verse 4, he's like, you can't render me a recompense. You can't tell me you sorry by taking vengeance upon my people. That's what they did. So now I think that's it with that. Oh, check this out. Rise to power through the slave trade, right? It says expansion by conquest. Dahomey, which is in modern day Benin, rose to prominence in the early 18th century by conquering coastal kingdoms like Al-Lida, right? Al-Lida, see right there, it says Wida, which is a corrupted way of saying Judah. So when you look at an old map of Africa, you're going to notice it says Negro land because Negro land is referring to who? The Israelites that was fleeing Roman persecution and they settled in Africa, all right, which was already foretold in the scriptures. So you got Western Negro land and then you got Eastern Negro land. All right. When you look at our people are energetic, they lively, right? As you can see, even though we're the most hated people, the world gravitates towards us. The music we make, it ain't just hip hop. Look at Africa. All right. They got this genre that I recently came across. It's called piano. All right. Which, that's Israelites that came up with that, because Hamites, they don't have the type of spirit we have. Hamites don't have the type of spirit to where everybody want to be like them. No, everybody wants to be like the Heavenly Father's sons, like the Heavenly Father's nation, which is the nation of Israel, the so-called Negroes, Hispanics, and Native American Indians. So this particular Hamite tribe, the Dahomey tribe, they're Hamites that fulfilled the prophecy in Joel, the third chapter. All right. And who did they go to war with? The people that they defeated in war. And when they defeated us in war, what did they do? They sold us to the Greeks, they sold us to the Arabs, and ultimately, from defeating us in war, they used that to fund their kingdom so that it can thrive economically. No different than the Arab slave trade, no different than the slave trades in general. All nations benefited off of our oppression. All right. It's another train coming. Let this train pass by. Yeah, pretty much when I do videos, I have this spot, brothers know what I'm talking about. I got this spot. It's like a couple of feet from like the actual train tracks near the water. So, where I'm at, people can't really like see me. They can't really hear what I'm talking about. So that's why I picked this spot. But it says by controlling the port of Wida, which is Judah, it became a key hub for exporting enslaved Africans. All right. So those people that went into slavery, they were Israelites, because you gotta look at it like this. If we are African, how come the whole continent of Africa didn't go into slavery? It was a specific group of people. Why? Because it was prophesied that that would happen. All right, go down here. Yep. Let's see. It says economic dependence. The sale of enslaved people, aka the Israelites, right, was a primary source of wealth and power for Dahomey's kings. Dahomey kings referring to the Hamitic tribes, right? Or Hamitic tribe, Hamites. With the prophets, the monarchy acquired guns and other European goods. That's why Joel, the third chapter, says what it says. You sold a boy for a harlot, you know, sold a girl for wine and resources, which further strengthened its dominance. All right. That's pretty much it. It's pretty much it. There you go. That's prophecy fulfilled. Now, let's read this. This is Deuteronomy 28 and 25. It says, the Lord, right, Yahweh, shall cause thee to be smitten before thy enemies, right? Who's our number one enemy? First and foremost, it was talking about the Romans. But later on down the line, it would be the Dahomey tribe, which is the Hamites, the Arabs. You had the sub-Saharan slave trade. And then them Jewish Edomites, which financed the slave trade and slavery, right? It says, so we got smitten before our enemies. Why? Because we read on down in this chapter, it said that there would be no might in thy hand, and that no mortal man or earth will be able to redeem us, meaning to deliver us out of our trials or tribulations, right? Because who's the one and only Redeemer and Savior of Israel, Yahweh? So that title and that glory belongs to him, not no mortal Israelite man or earth. It says, thou shalt go out one way against them, right? That's what happened when we was fleeing Roman persecution. It says, and flee 7 ways before them into the interiors of Africa, north, south, east, and west, and other areas like Yemen, Saudi Arabia, all around the world, right? All throughout that region. It says, and shall be removed into all kingdoms of the earth due to all the slave trades. All right. And this is why when I open up my videos, as you can see right here, I'm actually going to read this for you, right? The phrase African diaspora, which links up with Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 64, generally enter common usage at the turn of the 21st century. The term diaspora originates from the Greek, which means scattering. That links up with Deuteronomy 28:64, which gained popularity in English in reference to the Jewish diaspora, right? Before being more broadly applied to other populations. It is talking about us because when you look at Western Negro land, all right, you had the kingdom of Wida there. So it's talking about the Jews, all right, the Jewish diaspora, which is talking about us from Western Negro land, Eastern Negro land, all throughout Africa, all right, before being more broadly applied to other populations. It says less commonly, the term has been used in scholarship to refer to more recent immigration from Africa, because those people that was within Africa is referring to who? The original Jews, which was Israelites, so-called dark-skinned people out of the line of Shem. All right, so that's what happened to our people. This is Zephaniah chapter 2 and verse 12. It says, "Ye Ethiopians," which is another tribe of Hamites, descendants of Ham, like a famous Ethiopian is Nimrod, right? He was known as a mighty hunter, right? "Ye Ethiopians also, ye shall be slain by my sword," because they look like us, but they don't come from the same seed line. They look similar to us, but they're not the same. So let's finish it off with this. Because all the nations that had us in slavery, they're going into captivity. Jeremiah 30:16, "Therefore all they that devoured thee shall be devoured. All thy adversaries, every one of them, shall go into captivity. And they that spoiled thee shall be a spoil. And all that prey upon thee will I give for a prey. For I will restore health unto thee. I will heal thee of thy wounds, saith the Lord, because they called thee an outcast, saying, This is Zion, whom no man looketh after." All right, so that's pretty much it. Lord willing, you was edified.